Thank you very much, Gil. It's a pleasure to be here and to share some new information with you and some discussions about our activities in Luxor. And I'll be focusing on some of the new technology that we're utilizing in our documentation programs, but I'll also tell you about some of our other cultural heritage preservation work as well. We've been busy the last few years. As Gil said, James Henry Breasted's vision for the Oriental Institute after he founded it in 1919 was to establish a permanent base in Egypt to continue the scientific documentation of Egypt's amazing monuments. Being an Egyptologist himself, he was quite keen on copying all the hieroglyphic inscriptions that survived in Egypt. And he wanted a facility to be set up in Luxor first, where there's the highest concentration of monuments in Egypt, primarily from Egypt's Great Empire period during the New Kingdom. Now, money was, of course, always a problem, and he wasn't able to raise it until 1924. That was 2 years after the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, which generated enormous public interest and revenue. So in 1924, he set us up in Luxor, so right here, 400 miles south of Cairo, and we were launched. Now, he received permission from the Egyptian government, received the concession for all the monuments of Ramses III in the Luxor area, East and West Bank. And he started our program at Medinat Habu, which was one of the best preserved temples of Ramses III, the mortuary temple in the back, approached by an extraordinary Highgate fortification. And you have to imagine that the entire precinct was surrounded by a mud brick enclosure wall, the remains of which you can see back here, the height of those towers. So it was like a small city in its day. The team set to work copying the literally kilometers of inscribed walls that are preserved on the site. These consisted of historical documents, theological treatises. There's enormous amount of information about the history of the New Kingdom and the theology of the time. Now, Breasted was very keen on utilizing modern technology in the recording of the monuments. And up until that time, the basic way of recording a monument was either to do sketches in front of it or to do tracings of the hieroglyphic inscriptions using tracing paper. But the reliefs and texts in Medinat Habu were absolutely enormous, and there was no way you could do tracings that size. So at this point, photography was a brand new science, and Breasted was an avid photographer himself. So he created a technique where the precision of large format film photography and the artist's eye were combined to create beautiful scale drawings that were about as accurate as humanly possible. So the whole process begins with photography, large format film photography, square to the wall so that the negatives produced were completely square, rectified. And from those negatives, drawing enlargements, printed light so they could take a pencil, were produced up to about 20 by 24 inches. And senior artist Margaret de Jong is shown here penciling one of these in front of the wall surface that it was photographed. And essentially all of the details that you can see on the photograph, she would reinforce in pencil, and all the details that would not be clear in the photograph, but were observable when you're sitting in front of the wall surface, the artist could add. And when the penciling was finished back in the studio, either at Chicago House or back home, the artist would use the pencil lines as a guide for a series of thin and thick ink lines that very simply communicate the 3 dimensions of the relief. And the whole point of these drawings is that the photography, while it's fantastic, it cannot show everything, and in some cases it really distorts. So these drawings were intended to accompany the photographs and provide a balance of information. Now, even reinforced like this, there are some details that simply can't be seen. So the process goes one step further. The photographic enlargement is submerged in an iodine bath, which completely dissolves the photographic image and leaves just the pen and ink drawing shown here on the right. That drawing then goes through a rigorous correction process. It's blueprinted, and blueprints are cut into sections by the epigraphic team, taken back to the wall, and first epigrapher and then a second epigrapher goes through, adds corrections and refinements. They check each other, and then eventually talk things over with the artist who reviews the corrections, collation sheets at the wall. Here, Margaret and senior epigrapher Brett McLean are shown consulting on drawings in the tomb of Nefersekru, TT-107, that we're in the process of collating now. When the artists and the epigraphers are satisfied that the corrections are legitimate, they've hashed everything out, corrections are transferred to the original drawing, which is left back in the studio to keep it clean. And when all the correction transfers have been okayed by the first epigrapher, it comes to me, to the director, for a final review at the wall. And that's what I'm shown doing here. I take the finished drawing, the corrected drawing, back to the wall, check it for consistency of conventions. Sometimes even at this point in the process, you notice information that has not been noticed before. So the end process is many, many pairs of eyes looking at the wall. And this is the beauty of the Chicago House method, is really the collation process. The end result is a publication, of course. This was the whole point. We document the data from temple to temple to get it out into the world in the form of our publications. The last one that we did was Medinat Habu 9, 18th Dynasty Temple, Part 1, the Inner Sanctuaries. All of our publications now, I'm very pleased to say, one of the major technological innovations of the last decade has been the systematic scanning of all the publications of the Oriental Institute into PDF format, which is now available for free download from the Oriental Institute Publications website. We are giving away the scientific data. You can still purchase the hard copy publication, which has now become the limited edition publication, but we are now giving away the data that we have been recording and that the Oriental Institute's been recording over the years. And this is thanks to the generous gift of Louis and Misty Gruber, who got the scanning process started. And those of you who have downloaded our publications in PDF format know how beautiful the scanning is. They're tremendously useful, and it allows a much greater dissemination of our data to people who, under normal circumstances, wouldn't be able to access it at all, like students. Egyptian students in particular are so overjoyed they can download this stuff, they can trash it, they can download it again later on. So the new digital technology has allowed much greater accessibility of our product. And for those of you who are familiar with our publications, there are a series of plates in addition to a text booklet of translation of all the texts that we record. This is another of the services we provide. And we also, every single scene is shown in large format like this on single plates, and also reduced and joined into wall increments. And to give you an idea of where you are in the monument, we now have a little key plan at the bottom with a little bit of gray that shows you the wall surface that you are looking at. Now everything has changed. We still do the pen and ink techniques, but we also are now in the middle of a brand new chapter opening up where the quality of the ink drawings that we have traditionally done and that are universally recognized as among the best being done today We can now do the same digitally, and we can actually, with new digital tools at our disposal, we can do drawings and recording even more accurate and easily than before. And we've been waiting, we knew this was around the corner, we've been waiting for the equipment to catch up to our high standards, and finally, a few years ago, it happened. I must also say that the experimentation with the new equipment was funded by the University of Chicago Women's Board, for which we are very grateful, Dr. Marjorie Fisher, and some of the later experimentation by our friend Matt Wielden. Now, I must also introduce Christian Vertesch on the right and Tina DeCerbo on the left, who have both been leading us into the new digital age. Tina has been using Illustrator for years in Medina Tabu. I'll tell you about her graffiti recording program. Christian has a real knack. He's a Hungarian Egyptologist and a brilliant artist and extremely innovative. He saw these new tools and he knew exactly what we could do with them, and he figured out how we could. What we do is, first of all, it's Wacom who produced new drawing tablets, both desktop and smaller versions that were battery operated that we could take into the field. And using Photoshop in a very innovative process, Christian developed a technique where we can scan our negatives, put them on the drawing tablets, and we can do exactly what we would do with a photographic enlargement. You can, using a stylus, you can do penciling, you can do, with a click of a switch, you can change your stylus to inking. We do the double weighted lines, but the beauty of it is you can enlarge things. This eye, this hieroglyph that Christian is inking here on his original drawing is about 1 inch. And ordinarily, in order to get a beautiful line drawing like that, the artist would have to use a rapidograph and a number 15 scalpel blade to carve and sculpt the lines into their correct position. Now, the drawing stylus itself, with a click of a switch, can become the knife that you use to trim the line. Another click of the switch, it becomes the shadow line. Another click of the switch, it becomes the sun line. It's made the whole process infinitely easier to do. It's still arduous. It's not easy at all, but it's not the tear your hair out process that it was in the past. And here's Jay Heidel, who's doing the same thing. He's working on a scarab that in the presentation drawing will be less than 1 inch, and yet he's been able to enlarge it, do the fine details, and then he can reduce it back to the presentation size. So this is a fantastic thing for us. It's just made the whole process much easier. Now, we looked for guidance to see if others were doing what we needed to do, and we found out that they weren't, and that we're among the few in the world who are actually using Photoshop with these new tools. So in the end, we ended up writing our own guidebook, our own drawing manual called Digital Epigraphy, and it is largely the product of Christian Vertesch, with lots of editing from the rest of us, but as I said, he has led the way. And this past season, he has written 2 more chapters, which are being edited right now, and we will add them to the manual later this summer. So this will come out later in the summer. This is also groundbreaking in that it's the first completely digital book the Epigraphic Survey and perhaps the Oriental Institute's ever published. It is available for free download from the Oriental Institute Publications webpage. And it only exists digitally, or in PDF format. So this is what Chicago House, our present facility, looked like in 1933, shortly after it was constructed. The building was the gift or was built with a gift from John D. Rockefeller Jr. and his family, and I believe it was the same gift that allowed the building of this building that we're in now. Library here, residence here, support area, garages, photo lab here. And this photograph was taken shortly before the old corniche was put through. Breasted and Harold Nelson, our first director, knew that the corniche would come in, so they set the house back a bit. Things have, when I started work in 1978 as a student, we still had no neighbors like this. We were built outside of Luxor. Luxor is off to the right, a couple of kilometers. And there were no buildings around us at all. The gardens had grown up, but now, this is what Chicago House looks like today. Luxor caught up to us. We're now part of a northern suburb of Luxor, and the corniche was cut away and turned into a pedestrian corniche, which actually isn't so bad. It's a very pleasant place to be these days. Our library has increased in its value in that the current Ministry of Antiquities is encouraging young scholars, young Egyptian scholars, to get higher degrees, to get their masters and PhDs, otherwise they can't advance. So they're now encouraging rather than discouraging their young people, and we find ourselves mentoring many, many young Egyptian masters and PhD students. And I should point out that it's the Marjorie M. Fisher Chicago House Library. Margie is seated right here, doing some research with us, and this is Madame Sana, who was director of the Luxor Museum and is now general director of all the museums in Upper Egypt. She just finished her PhD. She did her master's with us years ago and got her doctorate this year in Cairo. And then the staff, Annie Helmholtz is our librarian, Gina Salama, assistant librarian, also Martina. Here are Richard and Tina working in the library. We have a fantastic group of people running the library. It's open Monday through Friday. We keep the library open on Fridays, and we work on Fridays so that all of our colleagues and Egyptian friends who have to take Fridays off can come and check references then. That's the only day often that they have. And Fridays are definitely our busiest days. It's wonderful to provide that service in Luxor. Now, our other activities, the primary archaeological activities or project activities in Luxor include, of course, the epigraphic documentation, which is still our primary core work in Luxor. But over the last 30 years, the climate's changed, the air is wetter, the ground is wetter, the population has exploded. All the conditions that allowed the preservation of these monuments in the first place have changed. Low population and dry as a stick weather, it's all out the window. It's completely different now. And the changing conditions are resulting in accelerating decay of the monuments. So we recognized this more than 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and added conservation to our program. Now it is required by the Egyptian ministry that anyone working on an antiquities site that requires conservation is obliged to do it. We also do restoration. It's the same thing. That's an old tradition. We were doing restoration back when we first started work in the 20s there. And now we're also doing training. And that's another training of our Egyptian colleagues. That's another thing that we started more than 20 years ago, and now it's regulation. So we've always been a bit ahead of the game there. We are working on 4 sites. On the right, upper right, Medinat Habu. On the West Bank, that's our primary site still. We finished the documentation of the mortuary temple and the Highgate, but now we're working our way through the publication program of the satellite shrines in the precinct. We're also working on a tomb on the West Bank, Luxor Temple on the lower right, and also Khonsu Temple at Karnak. And I will not be talking about our work at Khonsu today because our expanded work at Medinat Habu has required all the epigraphic team to work there, so we have not been at Khonsu Temple the last 2 years, but we will be back there, I hope, shortly. So starting with Luxor Temple, and this is a view from the east looking toward the west, and this is part of a Roman gate facility on the east that pierced a Roman fortification that surrounded, a fortification wall that surrounded the site in the time of Diocletian, which we helped our Egyptian friends restore. That was a number of years ago. Our present focus is the block yards around the temple. Now, in the late 70s, when I joined the team, we were still working in the great colonnade hall of Amenhotep III and Tutankhamun, doing facsimile drawings of the wall reliefs there. And in that time, we were, because the side walls were largely quarried away, we looked at the block yards around the temple, and at that time, all the stone fragments excavated from the clearance of the temple were just piled on the ground in piles. We looked to find pieces of the colonnade hall, and we found many. In fact, when I joined the team, we had identified several dozen, and I ended up identifying about 2,000 more. There's just a lot of material there, but it was all mixed up from the quarrying and later excavations. So our primary work after the documentation of the colonnade hall has been the systematic restacking of all the fragmentary material. This is all material torn off the walls in the Middle Ages, recycled and used for construction around the temple. We've determined that half of the material in our blockyard was actually quarried at Karnak and brought to Luxor during the Middle Ages for construction there. So we have been primarily protecting the material, placing it on protected platforms so that the groundwater salts will not continue to decay it, and we've sorted roughly by category. The end result of this work has been an open-air museum component in the blockyard. Now people can go outside the temple along the east and walk along visual displays of joined fragments that we have arranged chronologically. So we've added an educational component to the visitor's experience. We've also put up signage, and this is a project that is in progress both in English and Arabic, with historic photographs showing the history of the archaeological remains there. So primarily the blockyard material. Now, recently, just the last couple of years, we have developed a site management program that's been headed by Jay Heidel, shown down in the lower left, who has put together a database. We have more than 50,000 fragments that we have protected on platforms, but we have done no cataloging. There's just been too many, and we've been focused in other sites throughout Luxor. So Jay is now doing the mopping up work and has been systematically, he put together the FileMaker Pro database. Andrea Dudek, visiting committee of the Oriental Institute, has been a big assistance with this, and Jen as well. And the idea is to systematically record everything. We have made film photography of about 2,500 fragments that have been, that were part of the colonnade hall, part of the Amenhotep III, part of Luxor Temple that we've been documenting, but the bulk of the material is simply unrecorded, and so we need some sort of recording, and so this process has started. And what Jay is doing is he's mapping not only loose fragments, but also fragments that we have inserted back into their original wall context, like this barge of Khonsu group in the colonnade hall. Every block has an old number and a new one now, and with this database we're able to figure out exactly what's where. In addition to the loose blocks, there are also blocks that we have reassembled for the open-air museum. And in the database, it's very clear where everything is. We can put unlimited numbers of reference photographs and drawings in the entries, and there's even a space for indicating what kind of conservation is either necessary or being done. So it's a absolutely fantastic thing, and it takes enormous amounts of time to do all this entering. So far, we've created almost 4,000 entries in the database. We have a lot more to go. Jay has also been with our block yard assistant, Gina, has been affixing aluminum tags with their numbers onto each block. And we've got almost 3,000 of those done. And we have quite a few preliminary fragment groups on paper that are also being documented here that haven't either been physically restored or published yet. And this group on the lower right is a very exciting group, a copy of the famous Bentrech inscription from the stela in the Louvre that Professor Rittner is assisting us in the translation and analysis of. So this will actually be our first monograph in the Luxor Temple Block Yard series. Now, other groups include fragments of a Christian church from the very front of Luxor Temple, either 5th or 6th century AD. We have over 130 architectural fragments, many of them with beautiful inscribed decoration. The foundations of the sanctuary are still survive in front of the temple, and we're examining the possibility of physical reconstruction, but first we'll do a reconstruction on paper, as has been started here. In addition to the Christian architectural fragments reused in the foundations of this church were the Bentrech blocks, plus a whole group of Ptolemy I blocks that seem to relate to the Bentrech text. So we have photographed with film photography and digitally all of those blocks, and that's what we do. We do them group by group, category by category, and Jay is in the process of doing ink drawings of this entire group for that monograph. Now, this season we started a very exciting new program in our efforts to document as much of the fragmentary material at Luxor Temple as possible in the shortest amount of time. We have utilized another new technology that has recently emerged, and we're finding all kinds of fantastic applications for. Ordinarily, when one photographs a fragment, you take it out of the row it's in, it has to be on a turntable or something, you have to dismantle the rows. So what we've been trying to determine is how can we blanket photograph these tens of thousands of fragments without dismantling all the rows. And we have figured out a way. Hilary McDonald, one of our crackerjack digital photographers, and again assisted by Gina, has developed a technique where photogrammetric photography, which involves taking multiple photographs from many different angles and then using Agisoft photoscan software, which stitches them all together, you've got a 3D image, a rectified 3D image. So what we've been doing is we've been blanket photographing all the rows, and we've started with the Akhenaten Talatat material from Karnak. We have about 5,000 to 6,000 of these blocks that were brought from reused positions at Karnak and reused in the Middle Ages around Luxor Temple because they're very easy to construct with because of their smaller size. These will be among the first blocks that we know come from Karnak that will go back to Karnak, so we're documenting them first. And as an example, we're focusing on this one block here. And I have to thank Hilary for these slides. By photographing, and you can do this even with your iPhone from many different angles. In this case, it's between 12 and 16. And feeding this into the photoscan software, the software will digitally stitch it all together into a three-dimensional image. And essentially, there's a progression of a dense cloud to mesh that gets denser and denser. And by putting small targets on a section of each block, you can make sure everything is absolutely rectified and square. the end result is a beautiful 3D or 2D image that is completely square, that can be utilized for drawing, for reference, for anything, for joining, for whatever you want. And you can turn it around and you can look at the edges. And so we are creating now a catalog of these images. And we have right now it's a 5-year program that has been very generously funded by an anonymous donor. You know who you are, and I thank you very, very much for this. It's a beginning. We have a lot to do, but we're hoping to do between 5,000 and 8,000 blocks a season now that we've got a program together and have worked the bugs out of it. Now, our digital drawing guru, Christian, has been, for the last couple of years, doing facsimile drawings of a section of Luxor temple that was originally dedicated to the cult of the king, cult of Pharaoh. In the time of Diocletian, the beautiful Amenhotep III reliefs were plastered over and painted with some of the most astonishing Roman period frescoes that survive, not just in Egypt, but anywhere in the Mediterranean. These frescoes, and let me just jump ahead here to give you an idea of the quality. These were obviously imperial court painters, and the subject is the emperor and his court officials. And sadly, much of the painting was stripped off in the 19th century. Here you've got the Roman emperor's boot. He's seated on a jeweled dais. Those are jewels, Carlotta, big jewels. And then you have the court officials around. Well, Christian started the documentation of this by drawing on photographic enlargements. But since he started this, last year he started doing it digitally and doing actual digital inking using iPad Pros. Now, we started with the Wacom drawing tablets. Before you know it, Apple finally came through, and iPad Pros now have a drawing capability with beautiful fine point styluses that allow even greater ease of drawing than the Wacoms did. So we're now utilizing more and more the iPad Pros. And again, you know, we're sort of sorting things out. Christian is the great experimenter and leading the way in this. But he's doing all these drawings now on the iPad Pro. Now, because we have a very interesting situation where we have both Diocletian period Roman frescoes and 18th dynasty reliefs side by side, what we're going to be doing is Christian's drawing everything, but we'll produce 2 volumes. The first one, because the frescoes are the most fragile and we want to get them done first, there will be a presentation of all the Roman frescoes, and the Pharaonic relief context that the frescoes are over will be produced in grayscale, so it'll be just very, very light. You'll hardly be able to see it. And this will allow us to not only present the frescoes as they survive, but also reconstructions based on 19th century paintings that were done of the frescoes before many of them were stripped off the walls. We will have a second volume where it will simply be the 18th dynasty reliefs, and the Roman overlay will be in grayscale, so that we'll be able to concentrate fully on one period and then the other in 2 separate volumes. Now, our major site of operation, of course, is Medinat Habu on the West Bank. And as I said, we finished the Mortuary Temple publications a long time ago. We are working now on the 18th Dynasty Temple here. The main epigraphic team is centered here, and I'd just like to introduce you to the staff, Senior Epigrapher Brett McLean and Epigrapher Jen Kimpton, and they're both here tonight. Senior Artists Sue Osgood and Margaret DeJong. And then Christian down below. And then We had Jonathan Winterman join us as student epigrapher this year, and he will be continuing next year as well, and Dominique Navarro as beginning artist. And then we also have Kelly Alberts, who is incredibly clever, with absolutely anything. We are using a lot of high-tech drawing tools now, but sometimes very low-tech methodologies are required to squeeze the data out of the temple sites. For instance, here we have a square pillar that is inscribed on the inner face here. There was a later Ptolemaic wall built against this pillar, and there's a gap of less than a centimeter. You can see the decoration, but you can't photograph it, you can't draw it, you can't trace it. But what you can do is you can slip sheets of aluminum foil in the crack, rub it with a big Q-tip, and bring it out, and then trace it. So as a result, even though that column, that pillar face, is completely hidden from view, we are going to be able to publish a complete drawing of the entire scene based on this very low-tech methodology, which is brilliant. And Kelly is very clever at utilizing this. This season, we had the pleasure of hosting an epigraphy training program. We were going to be training Jonathan and Dominique anyway. The Ministry of Antiquities urged foreign missions to also include a couple of ministry inspectors in their training programs. So there was a sort of competition and vetting process, and we ended up with Inspector Shaima on the left, who we had actually worked with at Karnak in Kansu Temple, and Inspector Nadia on the right, who Jay had actually done some preliminary training in epigraphic recording techniques. So they joined us for most of the season and were just delightful to have with us. They are already taking their skills and training other inspectors in the conventions that we utilize in some of the drawing methodologies. One of the things that we instill in our trainees is the fact that we try to record the wall surfaces non-invasively. We don't want to press the wall. We don't want to be damaging the wall in our recording. That's why the photographic and digital and scanning processes of recording are so valuable, because you're not harming the monument that you're recording. Some wall surfaces are totally fine to trace, but anything that has plaster surface is just, that's just not good. Tina DeCerbo has been coordinating our graffiti recording project at Medina Tabu for many years now, and she used Adobe Illustrator for many years. She has a program where she and her husband, Richard Jasnow, recording graffiti everywhere it occurs, on the rooftops, and we're lucky we have rooftops that survive at Medina Tabu, sidewalls, everywhere you can imagine. And what they've done is they've created maps showing every single block in the roof. This is the second court at Medina Tabu. And block by block, they have indicated all the graffiti that's on the top. And you might think, oh, why bother? It's just graffiti. But this is amazingly cool material. These, see the footprints? These stand in for statues, for people who couldn't afford statues. Sometimes they wrote their names next to them. This is sort of the cheap version of statuary, of monuments of eternity. And these are a class of people who didn't have other monuments, who didn't have tombs or stelae. These were the guards, these were the minor priests, these were the common people who were up there. And they sometimes write their names, their genealogies, sometimes events that took place. So sometimes there's some really interesting historical and religious information that's included in these. And Tina has made this her specialty in epigraphy. She's now working in the northern annex, the Ptolemaic annex added to the small Amun temple, and using new software, I believe it's D-Stretch software. She's able, it's like a filter that you would put on a normal camera. Different colored filters bring out different details that might be faded on the walls. Well, you can look at this wall surface at Medinet Habu and swear there's nothing there. And the sad thing is, there was more there in the 1920s and 30s when we started recording, that the moisture in the air is dissolving it. It's just disappearing at a rate you just can't believe. But with this software, all kinds of colors are coming up. And Tina's even, I happen to just love this. It's this little section here where she's got a camel. And these are Christian period paintings that were, there's several layers of them apparently over Demotic inscriptions even. So it's a layer cake of delights, and Tina is just dedicating her life to extracting this from very difficult to read surfaces. We also had the pleasure of the company of Alexandra Hallman this season as a visiting epigrapher working in the God's Wives chapels. This is one of our next recording projects, and it's great because everything Alexandra does we'll be able to utilize in our publications. We will simply cite her. But it was a great pleasure having her working with us this season. Now, another component of our work at Medinet Habu is the block yard. It's much smaller than the block yard at Luxor Temple, but it has all kinds of amazing material from early Pharaonic all the way through the Middle Ages. And again, we've protected it on raised platforms, and we haven't had much time to do analysis of the material, but I'll give you one case study which shows why preserving and documenting and studying this material is really important. This block turned up, and this is fantastic. It's just one of those Rosetta Stones, almost literally. This is upside down, but it's a relief that showed the titulary, the names of Ramses III, and it's in his normal style. It even has some paint preserved. But the underside of the block was a text that was very similar in style, but with an erased cartouche. And this didn't make a lot of sense. We looked at the cartouche, there were traces, and there are even paint traces. Yes. And we puzzled over this for a couple of years. There's a trace up here. I really wanted it to be a sun disk. This looks like Usur Ra Setup Enra, which would be Ramses II, but Ramses II's monuments were still standing in the time of Ramses III, so that didn't make sense. Well, there is a little bit of blue that was preserved in the trace up here, which meant that couldn't be a sun disk, which was always painted red or yellow. It had to be a T. This is Tausret, who was another female pharaoh who ruled at the end of Dynasty 19, whose mortuary temple, we know where it was, but all it is foundation trenches. Someone completely dismantled her mortuary temple after her death, and now we know who, because there were other reused blocks in the sanctuary of the mortuary temple of Ramses III that were not inscribed. This is the only inscribed one we found, but we've got definite signs of reuse. All the blocks in the sanctuary come from another temple, and it now seems quite likely that it was hers. So this is one single block has given us information that really adds to the history of the 19th dynasty and early 20th. We also have a training program for conservators at Medinet Habu. We have been doing this for quite a long time under the very capable and enthusiastic supervision of Lutfi Hassan, who is our conservation supervisor at Medinet Habu and has been for quite a long time now. He's a great teacher. We have concentrated our training programs on students who have had no field experience. The American Research Center in Egypt sponsors conservation training programs that focus on ministry personnel. But we're focusing on people who might go on in time and work for the ministry. And so we have focused on them. This past season, we had a couple of conservators from the ministry also join our training program. And it's just so satisfying to help them along, but also know that by training these people, these very talented young people, this is helping to ensure the maintenance of the monuments, which is the challenges of monument maintenance are just vast. As you know, Egypt's monuments, the Pharaonic monuments in particular, are big tourist sites. They're a major source of Egyptian economy. They have to be maintained, and conservation is completely open-ended. It just never, ever stops. So these people will go on and train others, and many of them have stayed on with us, and as our conservation programs and restoration programs at Medinet Habu and elsewhere have expanded, we've been able to utilize their expertise. And so here we have some shots of the groups working in our block yards, doing conservation, learning conservation techniques for maintaining stone, mostly sandstone, treatments, desalination. There's a lot of salt in the stone, so they're learning all of these skills that they will take with them. One of our micro projects that's been ongoing for a long time because it's such a mess is a beautiful inscribed well of Ramses III on the south side of the mortuary temple that, because of rising groundwater and groundwater salt decay, started to collapse about, goodness, it was more than 15 years ago. The local ministry authorities asked us to please help. So this is when we actually started putting together our stone teams that do stone restoration work. We had to dismantle this part of the well because of the pressure. It was focusing on decaying lower blocks. We put all of the decaying and fractured blocks on a series of platforms around the well, and we've been systematically conserving them ever since. And some of our conservation trainees have been working on that. There's also a tremendous amount of salt that coats the inside of the well, so it's a great classroom for salt removal and desalinization. Oops. The other micro project that I'm very pleased has just been finished this season, which took a few years, is a gate from the Roman period from the time of Domitian, around AD 81, in the Egyptian style, which, as you can see, groundwater salt decay had attacked the lower stone courses to the point where the whole thing was about to fall over. So we, first of all, completely documented it with photography, AutoCAD, all kinds of digital drawings and photography. And then it started the dismantling process. Everything had to come right down to the foundations. And then all of the stone blocks that needed conservation had to be conserved and consolidated. And then the re-erection process started, which also took a couple of years. But I'm pleased to say that all of the mortar infilling was finished. The conservation teams and the stone restoration teams collaborated, joined forces, and this is in celebration of the completion of this project. And we'd never done anything quite like that before. Now we have a project that is funded by USAID that essentially continues a program that was started by the University of Chicago and the Oriental Institute back in the 20s and 30s. We finished the clearing of the Medinet Habu precinct in order to free the walls from encumbering debris that would allow us to record them. And the project archaeologist for the architectural survey at that time was Uwe Holscher, who the Oriental Institute contracted to do the archaeological work. He was the best in the field at that time, but he didn't finish. And USAID Egypt is very interested in conservation and restoration work that will facilitate tourism. And this part of the precinct is such a wreck that it's actually, a lot of people just don't go out there. So our proposal was to develop this part of the site, restore a series of ancient paving from the time of Ramses III that would allow people access to the western part of the precinct, where there's some very interesting monuments that I'll show you in a moment. Oops. And we began last year with the construction of a viewing platform. There is a small palace of Ramses III attached to the south side of the first court that we restored back in the 30s, the 20s and 30s. And this is an area where groups would come and be able to look at the archaeological work going on and get a view of the southern wall of the Ramses III temple. And we were able to finish that last year. So this is the finished product here with the mud brick walls around it. We made this because this is not an antiquity, it's not a restored ancient piece of architecture. We utilized very regular stones that are completely different in style from the masonry used by the ancient Egyptians. The next phase of the program was to put in the paving that is partially preserved up here and down here along the southern well and create a border of restored mud brick over an original Ramses III mud brick enclosure wall. And so what we did, and again, thanks to this grant, we were able to do it. We had special stone quarried from the original sandstone quarries. We very carefully shaped the stones, mimicking the style of Ramses III, and we made them thick enough so that they would not disintegrate in a couple of years, which is extremely annoying when you do a lot of work and then it starts to fall to pieces almost immediately. And this is what that paved area looks like today. And you can see that there are absolutely no regular stones at all. Everything is quite different. And we have enough of the original Ramses III pavement that survives to indicate exactly this style. And this is the stone team, headed by Frank Helmholtz, assisted by Johannes Weniger, and our very, very talented group of Egyptian stonemasons who we have essentially trained from scratch. And we have a couple of new ones who we added to the team because of this grant. Now, part of the other component of this particular project was the balustrade of restored mud brick. And we, for the first time in a long, long time, we made our own mud bricks. We were assisted by the American Research Center, who gave us old bricks from the cleanup that they're doing of demolished Gurna. So quite a few of the bricks from the demolished houses came to us. We broke them up and made new bricks out of them. And I just want to point out that to make sure, when you do restoration work, you have to make sure there's an impermeable layer between the old and the new, and that the new bricks, which we made the same size as the old bricks, but you have to differentiate the new from the old. So we stamped them, just like the ancient Egyptians did, but with the University of Chicago's stamp, which we designed. And see, it's like a brand. My conservation team just loved this. They just thought it was the coolest thing in the world. We've been wanting to do mud brick restoration work for years, and believe me, we have probably about 100 years worth to do. So anyway, we've made a fantastic start. And this will just give you an idea. This is before. They're preparing the way for the paving and the brick. The brick had to go in first before the pavement. And the Ramses III bricks are all a very large size. We had some intrusive walls down the row that were from the 25th, 26th dynasty. They were smaller, so we made sure that we made the restoration bricks smaller as well. And this is what the brick walls ended up looking like. And this is a work in progress. These walls will grow in time. And again, just a view of this finished section. Here's the viewing platform, the palace of Ramses III here, the beginnings of the Ramses III enclosure wall. when it was finished, we took this photograph from the roof. This is a photograph by Frank Helmholtz, so you can see the brick wall here, the restored paving. You can see how we've integrated the paving with what remains of the old paving. You won't believe this, but in a couple of years, this sandstone and that sandstone will be the same color. When it's freshly quarried, it's almost white, but in a very short period of time, it dries out and darkens. So you can't use the color as a means of identifying old and new. And I put this in because the last day of work, when we removed our barriers that restricted access to the site because it was a work site, within 5 minutes there was a tour group on it. It was so great. It was absolutely wonderful. So Frank was able to get this photograph. Now, one of the monuments in the western part of Medinet Habu that we want people to have access to is a house or an office from the time of Buddha Amun, who in the 21st dynasty, we know from texts found in the rewrapped royal mummies, he helped coordinate the rewrapping of the desecrated burials in the Valley of the Kings. And it may be that some of this work actually happened at Medinet Habu. So Uwe Holscher had excavated this. It's one of the last things he did in 1930-31. So we have the photographs, but we have absolutely, thus far, no records of what he did and how he did it. In fact, the western area, he fully intended to come back and finish, and he never did. There were no other seasons after 30-31. So Nadine Muller and Gregory Marard are our archaeologist consultants and on our security list as part of Chicago House. And Gregory very kindly took a week, year before last, in the spring to do an exploration of this house. We didn't know if Holscher had completely excavated it. It's a raised platform on which he had a receiving hall. We didn't know if the interior fill of that platform had been completely excavated or if there was original material still in there. We could not do any conservation or restoration before we knew this. Gregory determined that Holscher had gone right down to the bottom. So he had emptied everything out and refilled it. There was modern debris in the bottom, so we could, with great confidence, continue our reconstruction work. And we're very grateful to Greg for his assistance. So that's what's happening here. It's the beginning of the cleaning and the mud brick restoration. And this is what it looks like now. The basic restoration and consolidation of the casemate platform has been finished. And next season, we'll be putting a paved walkway around the site that will allow visitors to see, but not to touch. There'll be some sort of guardrail around it. And each of those columns has scenes showing Buddha Amun and texts. We're going to take very careful photographs and have a series of educational panels around it, so those of our colleagues who want to access the data can do so right there without going up and touching the very fragile plaster on the columns. So anyway, that's also a work in progress. Oh, and also I should point out again, Lutfi Hassan here, who coordinated this whole program. So our USAID grant is focusing on this area and this area of the complex. House of Buddha Amun is here. And one of the most exciting projects that we're working on right now is the destroyed Western Highgate. And you have to imagine, those of you who visited Medinet Habu and gone through this enormous Highgate entryway, most people don't know there was another one on the other side, and it was even bigger. But it got completely destroyed during a series of civil wars at the end of Dynasty 20, the beginning of Dynasty 21. And there's nothing left of it except some scattered blocks. This is what the site looks like today. And the towers would have been here. And we actually have a small bit of the glacis that's preserved here, and then foundation trenches. And we know that Holscher had every intention of coming in and cleaning all this up. all those blocks are inscribed. Project coordinator Jen Kimpton has been supervising the first stages involved creating a database of all the blocks. We didn't know what we had. They simply were not all published. A few had been, but not all. And you can see that some of them are considerable size. So maps were done, the database was created. Kelly Alberts is the project artist, so she is systematically drawing all of the blocks. And even though it's really still in the initial stages of analysis, Jen and the team have made some wonderful associations and joins. It turns out, like the Highgate on the east, the western Highgate had battle scenes, reliefs that were of battle themes, and the king being victorious over Egypt's enemies on the outside. But on the inside, there are domestic scenes showing the king eating and drinking with his children and minor wives and concubines. So very similar program. These towers are like follies. They're like high-rise palaces that have these battle themes on the outside. And this is Kelly's drawing of one tower scene. It's very Cecil B. DeMille, isn't it? And what we're looking at, of course, is the king in his battle chariot shooting, in this case, Nubian enemies. There may have been Libyans on the other side, but it would be the mirror image on the other tower. And what's interesting is this faces west. And apparently this was the major administrative entryway to the complex. And underneath the debris behind Medinet Habu, there's probably a whole installation of some sort that we don't know anything about. So this is something that future archaeology will give us more information about. And what we've determined, well, actually, I'll get to that in a moment, to say some of our preliminary analysis. Now, when we started this work, of course, we consulted with Nadine and Greg about, how to go about doing the cleaning and the mapping and all. They suggested that we do 3D mapping of the entire western area. And again, using this wonderful Agisoft PhotoScan software, we determined that we could actually do 3D imaging very simply ourselves, in-house. We did not need to bring in a 3D imaging team. This software is just has so many applications and is so useful. And like literally, if I'd gone around with my iPhone and taken a couple thousand photographs, the software would stitch it together into a map not quite as detailed as this. Our digital photographer, Owen Murray, took on this program. And I love this particular moment in the process. We knew that we had to take a whole series of 2D digital images in order for the software to stitch it together. But of course, at the same time, we had to get it up high. So we didn't have any kites or anything like that, but what we did have from the 1920s was an expandable tripod that went up, more than 10 feet, to which Owen lashed his digital camera and went around the complex photographing everything from this tripod. So it's this perfect fusion of 20s technology and contemporary technology. I just love that. But let's see, and the end result was, the beginnings of this map. So it was phenomenal what was possible with these somewhat primitive conditions. We were very pleased. Now, we found him a new tool, which eliminates the need to lash the digital camera to the tripod. We have a Phantom 4 UAV. We fondly refer to it as our flying camera. And that has enormously improved Owen's disposition, let's put it that way. It's saved him a lot of time and taken the requisite amount of images in a much easier manner. So ultimately, we hope to do recording of the entire. We've actually got quite a bit of this recorded. It just hasn't been processed yet. And the idea is that in time we'll do an entire three-dimensional map of the whole precinct, because there's a lot of restoration work that has to happen there. This is really just the beginning of a very long-term program. And one of the things Owen did was, with our total station, he wanted to make sure that our 3D images were meshing with the 2D maps that Holscher did. And he finds that they're meshing beautifully, and he was able to check Holscher's coordinates. And the maps that Holscher did with much less sophisticated equipment, absolutely perfect. So the Oriental Institute did well. And for those of you who would like to access these 3D images, I'm not technically savvy enough to have a rotating image on the screen. But if you go to this website, you can access it's a Sketchfab website. You can access our images that we have done, the 3D images, and you can rotate them any way you wish. And if you take a photograph of that, Owen tells me you'll be able to, with the proper software, you'll be able to access the website almost instantly. And I can give you the website later if you can't copy it here. And just to give you an idea of what we've learned so far, and this is totally preliminary, but this is another, this is a drawing by Kelly Alberts again, that shows the context of all the blocks, or many of the blocks that she's recorded, that we've recorded so far. And what it means is, first of all, it's tremendously exciting. We thought we had the upper story, but it turns out we have probably the upper 2 stories and then some. And apparently what you're noticing is there's very little below this line. And there seem to have been 2 phases in the demolition of this tower. First phase, the upper courses, or the upper the upper rooms levels were thrown off first, and then the rest of it was demolished later on and completely recycled and reused all over the Medinat Habu complex and the West Bank. The demolition debris, the recycling debris, covered all of this. So what we have is the remains of the 2 upper stories and nothing else. So it means we can never physically restore this entire tower, but our idea is to restore reconstructible parts of it in an open-air museum out there. So we're exploring this possibility. Now, we have one more site that I'm just going to discuss very briefly. We're also working on a private tomb in the West Bank. This is TT 107, the tomb of the steward of Malkata Palace, Amenhotep III's palace. His name was Nefersekru, and his tomb faces south, which is where Malkata was. Most tombs face east and are oriented to the west, which is quite interesting. So artists Sue Osgood and Margaret, working with our inspector Zainab, recording the absolutely exquisite reliefs. These are some of the finest reliefs and some of the last reliefs done during the reign of Amenhotep III. And we're very fortunate that whoever tried to destroy this figure of Nefersekru got tired and stopped, because it's a sunk relief, but it's equal, maybe even surpasses the quality of the carving in the famous Vizier Ramos's tomb from the same period. And what we're finding as we analyze the reliefs, the drawings are done, the collation is happening now, we're in the final stages of that. Brett and I should finish, and Jonathan should finish the final collation of the drawings next season. But note the robe that Nefersekru is wearing. The only parallel for this on a guy is Amenhotep III himself wearing a costume like that. So that's kind of interesting. Definitely high in favor of the king. And while we started the drawing of these reliefs with pen and ink on the photographic enlargements, we're finding many, many, many fragments of the reliefs. You can see the wall surface is wretched. It's in terrible condition. but all of the fragmentary material we're drawing digitally, which will then be stitched into the wall drawings. And finally, I am very pleased to announce that we are going to be submitting our next publication this summer, which is in the final stages of publication production now, Medinet Habu 10, the 18th Dynasty Temple Part 2, the Facade, Pillars, and Architrave Inscriptions of the Thutmose Peripterus. We've been working a long time on this, and it shows. There will be about 120 plates, some archival photographs of the monument taken at the beginning of our program at Medinet Habu. And with the new digital technology, we're able to stitch together, reduce and stitch individual drawings into composites of the entire wall areas. Brett has done this wonderful montage here. And then photographs and drawings of all the pillar faces and all of the texts. And an exciting additional component, we found that because the history of the Small Amun Temple extends over, it's more than 1,000 years, there were various periods of redecoration when additional elements were added to the structure, it was repainted. And so this is, whoops, stay, back. This is the original Thutmose color scheme. This is the color scheme in the time of Ramses III, who highlighted things in a red outline. In the time of 21st Dynasty Panojim, more red outlines and additional text was added. And then in the time of Ptolemy VIII, the color scheme completely changed. Now what's great about this is they didn't remove any of the original paint. They just painted over. So we've got all these different layers that, again, Christian Vertesh has made a point of studying over the years and extracted all these different phases. So this is a completely new and different component of the project, of the recording that we're able to present. And then another tour de force, drawing tour de force, this beautiful lintel from the time of Ptolemy VIII that really describes how the Ptolemies saw the Small Amun Temple and the shifting, the changing theology of the temple from the 18th dynasty to the Ptolemaic period. And then graffiti, because it's covered with graffiti inside and out. So we have done these, again, montages showing entire wall surfaces and indicated where all the graffiti is by number. And then Tina has done beautiful facsimile drawings of it all. And it's everything from Demotic to these wonderful boat scenes. So this is a very exciting publication for us, and we have 2 others on the way as well. So that's it. As you can see, we're doing a lot out there. And I have to say at this point that it's all thanks to you, because more than 50% of our budget we have to raise through grants or private contributions, and many of you have helped us. So let me take this opportunity now to thank you for that help and to urge you to keep it coming. We've got a lot to do out there. Thank you.